All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for another deep dive series, and man, am I ever excited to bring this one to you. This is a catalog that has needed to be dissected and discussed and really gone into. Um, as people know that follow my channel, yesterday was the official release date of my brand new book, my fourth book, Red on Black, The Listener's Guide to Sammy Hagar. This book goes deep into all of Sammy Hagar's solo albums. Of course, it talks about Montrose and Van Halen and Chickenfoot, but it's really concentrating on all of Sammy's solo albums from all the way back to 76 to the present day. And yeah, I'm excited to have it out. And so when I have a book out, I like to have a podcast that goes with it. And when I do a podcast, I like to have co-hosts that are fans of the artists. And I had the privilege of being on this gentleman's show a few times, the Booked on Rock podcast. Mr. Eric Sanick. Eric, how are you doing? And thank you for sitting in with me.
I'm doing great, Tim. Thanks so much for inviting me on the show. Look forward to talking Sammy.
Yeah, when we did our, I think we were talking about the Kansas book or the YNT book, and I realized what a big Van Halen fan you were, and of the Sammy era. I said you're going to like my next book. So sent Eric a copy, and I said, hey, do you want to sit in for the first couple of deep dives? He was up for it. So yeah, so we're going to talk about some in some cases some very obscure albums, but I think that they're worth diving into. So of course, Sammy did two albums with Montrose, the classic '73 debut, self-titled, and then Paper Money in '74. Left the band or was kicked out, depending on who you ask. So 1976, his first solo album, 9 on a 10 scale on Capitol Records. Not the easiest album out there to find. And this began a long solo career, and a career that just gradually built and built and built until he started to make a name for himself. But we'll get to that later. Um, so, Eric, what is your history with maybe not necessarily the album, but the songs on the album? Because I know that there's a lot of compilations, and sometimes it wasn't easiest to find the actual albums. I know it took me a long time to find the actual albums, but I had access to some earlier compilations that Capitol put out.
I was only familiar with one song off of this album, and my older brother had a best of cassette, best of Sammy Hagar cassette. It was really cheaply produced. It wasn't anything that was a major release, but he had it. And I remember seeing just one track from that album on there, which was Urban Gorilla.
I bet I know
This,
exactly what it was.
okay.
I bet it was something I talk about in Red on Black, which is the truck stop tape.
I believe
I
that's
have
the
a
one.
chapter in the book talking about the truck stop tape, and yeah, they were put out by Capitol, but there was not a lot of time and care put into it. Very cheaply made, very cheap looking, and Turn Up the Music
That's the one.
is that one right there.
That
And
is
all they did
exactly the one.
was
Yep.
reuse the cover from Danger Zone, and yeah, Urban Gorilla is the only song from 9 to 10 scale that's on that particular compilation. Yeah, those sort of albums were my introduction, because I couldn't find his albums anywhere for years and years and years. But um, so I found this cassette, and yeah,
Wow.
it's pretty varied. Like his early stuff is really varied. So that's one of the reasons I was excited to write the book, and one of the reasons I was excited to do this deep dive, because I don't think people realize, especially in his earliest days, it's not just 9 or 10 hard rock songs.
It's varied for sure. Yeah. Flamingos Fly. It's not
Yeah,
like anything
like
else, which was the
he
only single from the album, which is
yeah,
surprising, which is
he's
not
got it.
even.
So the first song in the album, I think, is my opinion, I think it's a complete throwaway. Keep on Rocking. To me, that's like a '50s retro kind of rock and roll song that just, to me, it's a interesting way to introduce yourself to the world.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the song either. And I thought it was funny. Sammy makes himself a little bit younger. He says, I was born in the 50s on the song. He was born in
And he makes it sound like
1947.
he was at Woodstock. Like, it never made any sense to
Well,
me.
yeah, it's interesting. I think he was at one of those festivals in the late 60s. Was it Monterey? I can't remember. But Yeah, it doesn't fit in with the rest of the album, and like you say, it's kind of an odd choice for an opening track coming off of Montrose, and especially when you start to listen to the tracks that follow. Because I'm a big fan of this first album. I actually like it more than the second one, to be honest with you. But yeah, that first track, yeah, I could go without. But
Yeah.
just to put it out there, Sammy himself has said just recently this was a period where he even felt maybe he should have waited a little bit longer to go solo. He was still finding his footing as a solo artist, trying to figure out which way he wants to go. Some of these songs sound like an extension of Montrose, some of them don't, like this one. But so I think this is an example of he's trying different things, and Flamingos Fly is another example of that.
Flamingos Fly is a Van Morrison
Van Morrison
and
song. Yeah.
song. And you know, I throw around the term yacht rock a lot. Well, this is yacht rock.
Yeah.
Flamingos Fly could fit right in. He's got a few songs like this in these early days. And Van Morrison recorded the song, but it was a year later. But yeah, that song, it's got steel drums.
Yes.
You barely know who it is singing. Like you might listen when he goes into a higher range. You're like, that kind of sounds like Sammy Hagar, but I don't think most people would be like, what is this? Like, I've never heard this.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Well, it's an interesting story behind it. I think he ran into Van at a party. It's like a record. They were on the same label, so
Yeah.
he offered the song to him. But it's interesting you mentioned the vocals because I also feel like Sammy's really not in his element vocally here. There's so much more that we get from him as the years go on. He's down in the mix, I think, and
Yeah.
he used to say that during his Van Halen days that he was never he didn't have a big ego when it came to his vocals. He wanted them down in the mix. You could hear it here. I think he's still holding back. Like there's so much power to his vocals, and it's almost like he's just a little timid there. Like maybe he's just not confident yet.
I have to
So
think
yeah,
that,
vocally, yeah, it's sometimes like you said, it's like, is that Sammy? You
yeah,
know?
I have to think that some of is down to the producer because listen to that first Montrose album. That's you without ever hearing it before. If you're a fan of him later, you're like, well, that's the Sammy Hagar we know
Yeah.
on Rock Candy and Rock the Nation and in Space Station Number 5. But here it's almost like a neutered version. And what I also find interesting about this album is that, you know, they made a big deal about him being this triple threat singer, songwriter, guitar player. Well, 4 of the songs on this album, so almost half of this album are covers. So they weren't exactly, you know, I think in a lot of these early albums, which, you know, we're going to get through, um, I think Capitol was just throwing stuff against the wall and hope that it stuck. But I think most people would have preferred he just kept the pedal down, which he does on the aforementioned Urban Gorilla. So after
Mm.
the non-committal sort of keep on rocking the throwaway 50s retro sound of that, we get a song that's with better production would have just absolutely smoked out of the speakers. As it stands, it's a very, very cool song. It's got time changes in it. It switches up. It almost in a, I'm not going to say progressive, but almost because it's atypical for him, and it's a really cool song. And I wish that he'd done more stuff like this.
So far, 2 for 2. I'm with you on this one as well. This is a great guitar rock song from Sammy. I think this album in general, he's really solid on the guitar on this album as opposed to the one that comes next. He's got his moments, but this is a great riff. It's got a great rhythm. Like you say, the time changes in there. Really solid song. A short, quick one, not even 3 minutes long, 2 minutes, 50 seconds. Or
Yeah, and a
2 minutes,
lot
52
happens in that
seconds.
time.
A lot
It's a
happens.
really cool song. It's a really cool song. It's always one of my favorites, but it's when you get these albums, you have to, it's like mining for gold. So yeah, we had Flamingos Fly. Then we have a song called China, which was written by Bob Welch. Now, Bob Welch was a member of Fleetwood Mac prior to Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks joining. And at this time, he was in a band called Paris that was also on Capitol Records. And then he had some solo albums on Capitol. He would eventually record this song. Now, I think it's okay, but to me, the best songs are the ones that Sammy wrote. So I don't know why the label kept feeding him all these songs to cover.
I'd love to hear Sammy talk about that because Bob Seger also they offered night moves to Sammy and Sammy said no. I don't know if he
Isn't
was
that weird?
right.
That doesn't make. Can you just imagine how different history would have been?
Yeah, Yeah, so it's fascinating. He wrote that in his book, Red. Maybe it was for this album. So it'd be interesting to hear Sammy talk about
It
this.
was
You know,
around the
was
same. It was the same year,
around that
'76. It
same.
was all Capitol
So
Records, and
was the label not sure? Was the label saying, let's get some covers in there? You know, let's see how we do. You know, you could throw in some of yours, or was Sammy still at that point where he didn't have enough material?
yeah,
I would love to hear
yeah.
Sammy talk
It's an
about.
interesting combination of songs. It's an interesting combination of genres, and there's a ton of players on this album. I mean, this is the reissued CD, so it's got a list of all the players. I mean, it's got,
You're right.
he's got a lot of different drummers on it. It's got Jerry Shirley, Jim Hutter, Ainsley Dunbar,
Right. From Journey.
Dallas Taylor. Now, Bill Church, his longtime bassist, is on this album. Other than that, there really aren't any recognizable names, except for Alan Fitzgerald on the keyboards. Fitz, of course, later of Night Ranger.
Yep. I tell you that the band's whatever lineups are on each of these tracks. I mean, there's some moments where the band sounds super tight, you know, and it
Yeah, it's
sounds
it's a bunch of session pros, right? Like they came
it's
in and they nailed it.
yeah, they
Um,
really sound great on these tracks.
but
Stein,
stylistically, I describe it as schizophrenic. Like it's all over the place,
yeah,
stylistically. So it doesn't make for the easiest of listens. It's a fascinating look back. Another thing that I talk about in my book is at the end of each chapter on each album, I talk about where the original versions of these covers came from, and if there are any songs in this album that other artists ended up recording. I talk about that as well. For example, "Keep on Rockin'" is one of two Hagar songs that were covered by, believe it or not, Bette Midler. How that ever happened, I have no idea. You can hear her version of "Keep on Rockin'" on the soundtrack of The Rose, which she starred in. It's really weird. And I really wanted to get into that because I people will be amazed at the variety of artists, not only that Sammy's covered, but that have covered his songs. Um, and so we get another original, and I think it's one of the strongest songs in the album, "Silver Lights." Now, this is a song that delves into his UFO obsession, which, I mean, anybody that knows anything about Sammy, he's a true believer, right? And what I thought was cool about this is I first heard this song probably '93, and as soon as I saw the title "Silver Lights," I thought of "Love Walks In," the silver lights shining down. So it's like he revisited that idea. But this
yes.
is a cool kind of spacey song that I kind of like, and that was he's got about one of those per album for the first few albums.
This song gets better the more I listen to it.
Yep.
And knowing the history of the song "Love Walks In," it is interesting to hear this. It's like chapter one or part one of his alien. In his what was he said he was they downloaded his brain or something. But you hear him say the nine,
The Nine, yes.
and
He always
he
said
said
they were
that was their name, the
they're
nine.
from the ninth dimension.
Right.
He called at one point he called his publishing company the Nine Music. You
Yes.
may see that in the credits. Yeah, absolutely. I can't really tell what he says at the beginning of that, but he's like
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you
something.
knew.
I can't. I've listened to it. I'll
Yes.
rewind it. I'll listen to it again. It's like something. And the nine. It's like, what does he say?
Yeah, they put an effect on his vocals, and it's kind of hidden behind the music. I would love to know. I'm sure people that are watching this now are going to type something maybe in the comment section. You guys know, because it is interesting. Yeah. Well, what is he saying prior
Yeah.
to that? But
There's
this is
there's no lyrics inside of this either. Like
oh, and the
there was a
vinyl.
lot of
Okay.
yeah.
But yeah, this took place, I think, late '60s. The story, and he's never backed down on the story. He's never said, "Oh,
No, he pretty much tells the same story every time.
yeah."
This
It
is
was
another thing about trying to get people's attention in record stores. I mean, this album cover, they didn't spend a lot of money on his album covers. This is a weird cover.
it's a weak cover. It really
Yeah,
is. Yeah, and it's yeah. The back might have been better than
that's a little better because you can kind of tell who it is. But you know what? It's
got the
almost a
Billy Squire
continuation
look
of
on
the
the
first
back.
Montrose album
Right.
because he's
Right.
and that's an album where I don't know how many times I've told people. I said, look, don't judge that album by its cover. It's a
Yeah.
great album. It
Yeah.
just doesn't look like it.
Yeah. Boy, that Montrose debut. I mean, that
Oh, that's a smoker. And I people were
lacked a
probably
single.
wanting
That's
him
it.
to
Just didn't
match
have a
that,
hit.
right? And with a few exceptions, he doesn't quite get there. But so I think the one song on 9 on a 10 scale that wouldn't sound out of place on his later albums is the first song on side two, which is called All American. It's a Sammy Hagar rocker, plain and simple. It's patriotic, and he says, "I'm your Uncle Sam." He'd
Uncle
he'd do
Sam.
that if you. That's the first of many times he would
Yeah.
do that. But I think it's a cool song. The album was produced by John Carter, or usually just goes by Carter. He's passed away now. He produced a lot of his early albums. It's okay. It's very AM friendly production, but I often wonder when you get these heavier songs like All American, like Urban Gorilla, if you'd had a Ted Templeman producing them or a Jack Douglas or someone like that, what these might have sounded like.
Yeah. And has he played any of these songs over the last 25 years since he left Van Halen and went back to being a solo
I
artist?
I
I
can't
don't think.
imagine that he. I think if anything from those Capitol years, I mean, you know, uh, it didn't belong to any one album, but obviously I've Done Everything for You. That became a huge hit for Rick Springfield, and he's had Rick on stage, and they've done the song. Other than that, maybe he does Red.
Well, that's the furthest he's gone back is Red. I think that's the
Yeah, so I don't
furthest
think he
he
touches this first album.
does not touch it, which it would be great for. I'm sure he has plenty of fans that would love to hear him bust out Urban Gorilla
Oh
or
man, that
Silver
would
Lights
just
or
be
All American. Yeah,
with the way Can you imagine like Satriani and Mike and Jason? Like,
be
ah.
fun. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it'd be fun.
now we have a really weird song. It's another cover called Confession, Please Come Back. It's written by a guy named Ron Nagel. Uh, the only information I was able to find out about this song was there's a live version of it on a Jefferson Starship compilation called Flight Log.
Mm.
It's the only other recording of this I've been able to find. It's an odd song. It doesn't sound like a single to me, so I'm not sure why it's on here.
It's got the backing vocals, the female backing vocals. I believe this is on this track.
Yeah, there's a
It's out of
lot.
place.
Yeah, there's a lot of that on here. It's kind of some of these songs are your basic all around like generic rock of the time, very much of the time. Like some of this stuff is very dated 70s as opposed to being vintage 70s.
Yeah, and I try to put myself in the mindset of 1976, just to be fair to Sammy. Maybe some of these songs he was thinking might work, or the label thought might work, might get some airplay on AM or FM radio. But
Yeah.
I
I
don't
think
think
they
many did.
no, it was I think it was two more albums before he had a song that I think I'm right. Yeah, I don't think either of the first two albums had any songs that even hit the top 100. So and next comes a song. The first time I heard Young Girl Blues, which is another cover, it's by Donovan. Um, I did have one of the few actual albums I was able to find by him early on was his 1978 live album, All Night Long. And he does that on there, and I'd never heard it before. It's this epic, it's like an epic ballad. It's this, I kind of like it. It builds. And he obviously likes Donovan because it's not the last time he would cover him. So I think this is one of the covers that kind of works. But again, I don't hear any single potential in this. First of all, it's too long, but he must have liked the song and wanted to record it.
Yeah, 7 minutes 50 seconds, but I like it.
Yeah.
It's a nice slow bluesy song, and Sammy's vocals are strong on this track. Not a single, but I'm glad that he included it. I don't oppose this cover.
No,
Definitely
no,
like
this is
this
the
over the
best of them,
others.
I think.
Probably the best. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. This is
Well,
definitely the
although
best of them.
China, to me, China's solid too. I like China.
China's good. Yeah. It's
His guitar work on that is
yeah.
great.
Yeah, it's the other thing about his early albums. I'm not really sure who's all playing guitars. There's somebody named Scott Quick that also plays guitar, John Blakely,
So
but
we may not be hearing Sammy on all the guitars here.
that's exactly right. Like I said,
Okay.
there's a lot of session guys on
Yeah.
here, and that's kind of a shame too because I mean he Sammy himself is pretty self-deprecating about it, but he's a perfectly good like lead guitar player in his own right.
He is. He's very solid when it comes to the riffs, when it comes to driving a song. Never a big solo guy. His solos always kind of fell flat for me, but in terms of coming up with a riff that drives the song, he's legit. And as we know, as we get further into his career, he's got some great riffs.
Yeah. And then I think kind of the album closes the way it begins with kind of a nondescript, kind of rock and roll song. Although it's kind of got a cool riff to it. But Rock and Roll Romeo Um, some of the lyrics haven't dated all that well, but
Oh, I
not
know,
every
right?
like there's a
Yeah.
few. Sometimes artists that have been around a long time, they'll look back and go, "Oh,
Oof.
like
I
take
know
that one back."
exactly
If
what you're referring to.
yeah, I take that one back if I could, but it's so obscure, right? Like nobody's gonna. But
Thankfully. Yeah.
yeah, so ends. I mean, it's an inauspicious debut. Of course, I got to show the 8 track off, but um,
Cool.
it's 9 out of 10 scale. Now, what I like about that too is like any Van Halen fan, about a 9 on a 10 scale from Sucker and a 3 piece. So it's like he's had that expression around for a long time. So, there's good ideas on here. And I think that the songs, for the most part, that Sammy wrote are the superior songs. But I just don't, I can see why this album, I can see why this album didn't sell. I mean, none of his Capitol albums sold all that much. I mean, the most successful of them might have sold around, I'm just guessing, 250, 300,000 copies in the States. Didn't have any certify, but this one certainly is the most obscure of them all. And it's just, it's, I think it's important to look back to see not only where he started from, but how far he progressed as an artist. I mean, at this point, he would have been 29, 28, 29. So he's still a young guy, and he's just, like you said, finding his way. And um i I have to wonder what would have happened if he had been able to sign a solo deal with Warner Brothers, because Warner Brothers was the rock label of the 70s. Oh, maybe Atlantic, but I mean, Warner Brothers they had Black Sabbath, they had Deep Purple, they had Alice Cooper, they had Montrose, and then they had the Doobie Brothers. Like they knew what to do with rock bands. And I mean, I suppose Atlantic had, Zeppelin and Yes and the Stones, um, Bad Company. If he'd have been on a stronger label, it might have made a difference. Capitol was a well-known label, but they weren't exactly a hard rock label. I
And he
think
was with him
Lab,
for quite a while too with Capitol. I mean, he was
yeah,
there right up through
he was there for
VOA.
he's 5 solid years, like all the way up till 1980, and then
Okay,
um,
what VOA? Wait, yeah, what Capitol has through Street Machine? I think beyond that, right?
Danger
Capitol
Zone. Danger
Danger
Zone
Zone was.
1980 is the last new album for Capitol, and
Oh, Geffen. Yeah, what am I
then
thinking?
he switched to
Geffen's after
Geffen for
that.
Standing Hampton, and that's when
Yeah,
fortunes turned around. But but he definitely paid his dues. I mean, just selling a little bit more each time. But um, yeah, the cool thing is these albums are easier to find now and been reissued than they were when I was trying to track them down. But a lot of them are forgotten, so that's why I wanted to write a book about his entire solo catalog
well,
and
this is an
shine a light
indication of
on it.
how. Yeah, I have a copy as well, and it's a fantastic book. This is an indication of just how important Sammy Hagar is in terms of those early albums. If you go to Spotify, they misspell one of the song titles, Silver Lights. It's Silve. They don't even. It's like, yeah, they just no luck on any of those early songs or albums for Sammy.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame. I mean, there are gems. That's the thing. I want people to know that there are gems to go back and discover.
Yep.
For anybody that maybe just bought has the Geffen albums, maybe they have unboxed. There's good stuff. It's just you got to sort through a lot of you know, the other stuff. I'm not going to say it's bad. I'm just going to say a lot of it is just stylistically not my cup of tea, because Sammy, the guy can sing the telephone book, right? And make it sound good, but he's not really in that full voice just yet, or he hasn't gotten that full force voice that he had on that first Montrose album. But I also think it's important for people to remember that first Montrose album was a flop when it first came out.
Yep. And Ted Templeman was frustrated by that. It didn't have a single. Oh, I lost you, Tim. You there? If you can hear me, you froze.
Playing over the years.
Oh,
So
hey,
maybe he was
Tim,
thinking, well,
I'm
that's,
just picking up on you now. You froze up.
oh, I froze. Okay.
Yeah,
When did,
yeah.
what's the last thing?
We were just, let's see, it froze up around We were talking. Oh, his voice. Yeah, how his voice got better. Oh no,
Yeah.
you were saying the Montrose album was a dud when it came out. Didn't do good at all. That's
Yeah,
where.
and everybody, looks back at it now and said, why didn't he just keep making music like that? That album was a flop. Why would you keep making music that wasn't successful? It was a long, long time for that album. I think it took 4 years to go gold, and then it wasn't until 1986 before it went platinum. Now it's looked back on as an absolute hard rock classic of the 70s, and it's a favorite album of mine. And I mean, obviously, Sammy thinks so too because there's songs he still performs those songs live.
That
But
entire
he,
album, start to
it,
finish.
yeah, but he hadn't quite gotten that voice back yet. He will. But as for now, that's kind of our take on the very first Sammy Hagar album, 9 out of 10 scale from 1976. So out there, we got any big fans of that album? This is just two people's opinions, and obviously, I'm a huge fan. Otherwise, I wouldn't have put pen to paper or started typing this out. Red on Black, Listener's Guide to Sammy Hagar. You can get this through Amazon, wherever your local Amazon is. And I'm going to do the entire Sammy Hagar solo catalog. And Eric's kind enough to sit in with me for the first couple. Eric, I want to thank you for doing this, but I'm going to turn it over to you because you've got Booked on Rock. Tell the folks about that and how they can find you.
Yeah, the website is bookedonrock.com. That's where you can link up to all of the listening platforms, but we're on all of them. Spotify, we're on YouTube. There are video episodes and audio episodes, so whichever you prefer. Just had Jesse Fink on. He's got another book on AC/DC out. This will be his third, and this is a follow up to the book he had on Bon Scott and The Lost Highway. This is called Notes from the Highway, and he's an investigative journalist, and he has found some information that shows that Bon Scott actually died of a heroin overdose, and that he wrote lyrics to the album from Back in Black from AC/DC. So it's just a fascinating read, and he was just on recently, and just I've got so many. I've had you on 3 times, Tim, for your Kansas book, for the 8-track book, and for Y&T. So people can find it on bookedonrock.com. Also, I can't forget Van Halen News Desk too, vhnd.com. We covered Sammy quite a bit this summer on his tour. So you can go to vhnd.com for all the latest Van Halen news. And as we're recording this, we're coming off the heels of the anniversary of Eddie's passing. Eddie passed 4
Yeah,
years ago,
yeah.
October 6th.
It's a weird week in October now because the 6th is the anniversary of his passing. The 10th is David Lee Roth's birthday, and the 13th is Sammy's birthday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of bittersweet time now.
Kind of weird. Eric, thanks so much for doing this. And thanks everybody for watching. So this is only the beginning. I'm going to go through the entire Sammy Hagar solo catalog. Hope you stick around. Thanks for watching this edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Go listen to 9 on a 10 scale.